Hello, everybody, and welcome to Army of Crime, your favorite comic book related podcast. My name is Matt. I am your first host. My other host, the second host, the equal host, is Dustin. Say hello to everyone, Dustin.
Hello to everyone, Dustin.
All right. So, this episode, a little bit of a change of pace, I suppose. We're looking at probably the most recent thing that we've looked at in a long time, forever. Not sure. We are looking at the graphic novel The Hard Tomorrow by Eleanor Davis.
It's from 2019.
Yeah.
Eleanor Davis, her career started, I think, fairly recently. I've read one other book of hers that was like a collection of short comics I think it was called How to Be Happy. That was pretty enjoyable. But this comic had a lot of critical acclaim the year it came out, as was put out by Drawn and Quarterly. And I had not read it before, and I believe you had not read it before either. I'll give a quick summary of what The Hard Tomorrow is about. It's set in it's kind of like a near future now sort of dystopian American situation, and the main characters are named John and Hannah, who are a couple who live in a truck and are currently trying to have a baby. And Hannah works as a nurse for an old lady named Phyllis, and John is building them a house. And then it kind of gets into their friends and Hannah's like activist work in the city, and things sort of go from there. So, Matt, what did you think of the comic book The Hard Tomorrow?
So I did like it. I mean, I thought it was interesting. It's like a slice of life, like you said. It kind of takes place in an alternate present, maybe we would
Like
say.
slightly, they're protesting this like use of chemical warfare is like one of the main plot points. So it's kind of like, it's a slightly alternate current take on the American political social situation.
Yeah. The art style is, I mean, the art is cool. It's like this thing that I suppose maybe indie comics ish are known for, like the a little bit of a cartoonish art style, but with like a very serious subject matter. But it is a cool art. I mean, it's very expressive. It's all black and white. It's kind of a slim volume. It's about 152 pages, 150-ish pages. Yeah, and the storyline, as a parent, I kind of related to, like, they're trying to have a kid, right? So I don't know. I would actually be curious to hear your take on that, because I thought it was kind of interesting as someone who has kids, right? Because it's
Yes.
part of the main plot line is that they're trying to have a kid, or that she wants to have a baby. So
In a
I
world that's
related to that.
quickly going to heck in a handbasket, it's
R-
very similar to our own world.
Right, right. This is why it's like the near future that is also now, or
Yeah,
whatever, because it's like, right, it's a fictional world, but I mean, it's basically our world.
right.
Yeah, but as someone who has kids, I did relate to it. I liked the characters. You start off, I mean, we won't go through all the stuff that happens, but they're going to like these protest movements, and you kind of see that everybody's kind of inner lives, right? And the way that their hopes and fears, frustrations kind of play out in this thing that they're protesting, right? And the way that the activists kind of interact with each other. Um, and her husband, is it a husband or a boyfriend? I think it's a husband. I
Yeah,
think they're,
they are married, as I recall.
yeah, and he's supposed to like build this house for them, but he's kind of a stoner.
Yeah, and the house building is not going very quickly, but yeah.
And he's friends with like this weird survivalist guy.
Yeah, and because they're kind of trying to do their own thing of like live off the grid and grow their own food, and he's friends with this guy named Tyler who is sort of into that, but in like the hardcore, creepy, like I own 100 guns kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm all sympathetic to that kind of idea, the idea of like kind of living less connected, to the Jeff Bezos money web that entraps us all. So, I'm down with that. It's an interesting story. I don't know. Well, first of all, give me your take as someone who doesn't have kids, because I'm curious. And then we could talk a little bit kind of about the trajectory it takes. I don't want to give out like spoilers, but I wouldn't say it's a real story heavy book either. But what was your take? I'm curious,
Uh,
somebody that doesn't have kids.
yeah, no, I liked it a lot. I thought it was really
Yeah.
good. You are correct that I don't have kids, so maybe
Yeah.
the struggle of having children or wanting to have children maybe didn't hit quite so personally. But in general, it grapples with this idea of the way that we live now, if I can use such a cliche phrase, and how we should live looking into the future, or as you might say, the hard tomorrow.
Title kind of makes it sound like a film noir.
Yeah, but I mean, it's literally about what's happening to the world and what are we going to do about it. And one of the characters, there's a part where Hannah and she has a friend named Gabby who they have a very close relationship that you at first you wonder if there's some kind of like romantic subtext here, but then of course the romantic subtext becomes text as the story goes on. They have an argument about whether a person should bring children into such a horribly screwed up world, which I feel like is a legit question for people to ask themselves, because one thing that the story I think also shows really well is the way that people are connected to technology, and then as things kind of spiral out of control, the way that technology also like continues to trap them. Like Mark Zuckerberg is mentioned several times as like a boogeyman sort of that they have to like be aware of, and then as things go on it kind of becomes, you see how these various forms of technology sort of people rely on them, but then they also are used to like entrap people of sorts. But I enjoyed The Hard Tomorrow quite a bit. I think that Eleanor Davis is very good at this cartooning thing, I would say, and she does something which I think is really great, which is, and I always admire in a good comic book, which is the visuals sort of like effortlessly adapt to the emotional beats of the story. By which I mean, like, when you have there's this really like evocative splash page in the story, or like there's even like a double splash page of this like protest march that's drawn in like a stricter like black and white, and it has like these stark like silhouettes of like police moving in and like beating people, and you get like the chaos of the crowd, which I think is, so that's like a more stark, like very monochromatic view of like living inside a police state with like the cops beating on everyone. Like there's a great page, it's page 78, I don't know if you have a copy on hand, but you have like the lights from like the street lights casting these like spotlights with like dark shadows, and these like black uniformed cops like moving in to beat everyone with like these buildings in the background. And it's just a wonderfully evocative use of black and white. But then there are other parts, like when Hannah's driving and she sees a woman with a baby, and the baby is drawn, and the woman and the baby are drawn in a very like warm, more detailed kind of fashion. That's not like, that's clearly cut from the same cloth and from the same pen, but is the visual is sort of hewed to this different emotional register that fits the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think there's a lot of interesting things that are certainly relevant to real life that are kind of bouncing around in there, because you talk about they have this question of whether people should have kids or not, and it's not a, I have thought of this question certainly, right? And like there was just a news story the other day about the ocean being on fire. I think that was today. The ocean was on fire because of an oil well that exploded in Mexico or something.
Yeah, I
And like
saw that.
yeah, so like you could make the same question about climate change. And here they're not really talking about climate change so much as the political situation, and there's like you mentioned, there's a thing with chemical weapons that they're concerned about. But it's a fair question. I think the author is not saying you shouldn't have kids, right? Because that's the
No,
characters in it are trying to have them. But it's certainly something I've thought about myself. I mean, I think it's a real question of like what are you trying to accomplish, or like what's the motive, for having kids, I suppose. I feel like it's a thing that not everybody, like there's probably a plausible number of people that don't think about it all that much.
it's like what Larry David says, where the world just needs more of you in it.
Right. Exactly. Because you're so great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they raise this question too, a little bit of I think the efficacy of like these protest movements,
Yeah.
because they do have these protest movements. And I would not say that as we see in the story, they're particularly effective. And sometimes they come across as kind of I don't know what word we want to use. I'm not trying to say like annoying, but like naive. Maybe naive would be the word. You know what I'm saying? Like some of the people inside the movement that she interacts with.
Well, the protesters are clearly care very deeply about these issues and have their hearts in the
Yes.
right place. Do the protests, they measure the efficacy of their protest by what kind of like news coverage they get,
Yeah.
which is not wrong because that's kind of what you want.
The divide between what happens to them and what happens in regards to their protest in the story and like the thing that they're trying to protest, it's a very stark divide.
Yeah, because there is, at first, it kind of seems like with many protests that are we just like shouting into the void?
Yeah.
It turns out that, in fact, the authorities are listening to their shouting into the void, and there's like a very heavy handed response, as is not, unexpected. The police and the government, their response to these kind of left wing protests are almost always like heavy handed, and that
Right. Right.
comes in sort of as the story starts to turn, I think, into a little more of the alternate, uh, alternate present situation, because there's the situation, and this is, well, what I was going to say too is that she does a great job of like shading nuance into these characters, where
Right.
Tyler, who's the character who's sort of like the survivalist conspiracy theory gun nut guy, has a bunch of cats and he's like really nice to them. So, and like there's a part in the beginning where Hannah interacts with a cop, and the cop kind of defies her expectations by not being like fascist goon. But then, of course, she later interacts with that cop again under very different circumstances. So it I think does an interesting job of like shading nuance into these characters. And then this is, I guess, the one thing that might be considered a spoiler, but the crazy survivalist character is talking about like drones and like, oh, the drones are watching us, you got to be careful. And the other character, John, is like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then like a drone apparently just like kills him on the
I
spot
feel like
or
it's a little
something.
ambiguous what happens.
It is a little ambiguous what happens, but it's interesting because there's like a turn in the story where the police are like cracking down on the protesters like really harshly, and then it actually seems like this guy's conspiracy theories are perhaps true, question
Yeah.
mark, about
Yeah.
like, and so it kind of like plunges you into even like further into the modern American dystopia.
Yeah. Right. The age old question of like there's something awful happening in the world, what are you going to do about it? And the answer is, I guess, the realistic answer is there's not always a lot you can like directly do about it. You can do what you can about it, and I guess history and wider social societal effects decide what the end result is. Because we saw with this is just recently the 2020 protests against like police brutality and stuff. You don't know if it's going to be this giant thing where police stations are burning down or not when it starts, right? And like the people in this story don't know where it's going when it starts. They're just making their attempt. They're just they're putting themselves out there.
Yeah, and they are like peaceful protesters, and it does show some more like violent protesters, but
Oh
it
right,
does.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And of
The
course, the more
anarchists.
violent protesters are like, what kind of limp wristed liberal nonsense is this? But it doesn't actually show them as really being right or wrong either, because
Yeah.
are their forms of protest better, or are they like more effective in any way? It's kind of hard to say. Probably not. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was interesting. Yeah, and it does make you think. Did it make you want to have some kids?
Not really.
Yeah. One thing it does get right is that you should never go on Reddit.
Yeah, Reddit features in the story about the wacky conspiracy theory character. It shows his web browser, and I believe there's Reddit, and then there's like the incel site, A Voice for Men, and then there's a site for like buying ammo.
Yeah, I think that should be the takeaway of this comic. Really, is never go on Reddit. I mean, should we say what just happens at the end? Because I feel like a lot of this is how she kind of sticks the ending. So if you don't want to know how it ends, you can just like skip ahead a couple minutes.
Yeah, I was
suppose.
gonna say,
I'm not sure it's like real. It's not like I said. It's not really like story heavy, so I don't really feel like it's fair to be like, oh, this is a spoiler. Like somebody comes back to life at the end or whatever. But
if you're
I
like really extremely spoiler phobic, you can.
yeah, but I did think the ending is cool. So
Yeah, the ending is great. She like really crushes the ending.
the ending is after all this other stuff has happened. Then she does become pregnant, and then the end they have a baby, and the last like 3 pages are just like pictures of a baby.
Yeah, they're like double splash pages of just this adorable newborn baby.
Yeah, which I feel like is the answer to the question of like, she's asking this question: should you have kids even though the world is hopelessly screwed up? And I guess the answer is yes, you should, because kids are adorable.
Because kids are like wonderful and beautiful
And,
creatures.
and you can, and I suppose what we're trying to say is that you can make them better than some of the people walking around, help them become better people, I suppose, than some of the people walking around. The
Like,
characters are fundamentally trying to build something, I guess.
right.
Build
Literally
something
and
lit,
metaphorically.
right, literally they're trying to build this house, but they're also, they want to have a kid or whatever, and they're trying to build like a better world, a better life for themselves, inside the crap sack world of the comic, which is basically our world, which I guess is the most you can do
Yeah,
in most situations.
is send, go into the future with perhaps better, your beautiful, wonderful baby that can maybe grow up and make the world a slightly better place.
Yeah, it's a long game.
Yeah, it is a long game, and it's kind of
It's
that's
not a satisfying answer of just burning down the police station and raising the flag over Washington
yeah,
D.C. or whatever, but I think it's a solid answer, and I think that ending delivers it by just having like literally multiple splash pages of a baby,
yeah.
and you're
It's a
like, yeah,
wonderful
baby.
like comic book thing that you can't really do in any other medium, because like in a book, could you write in prose
Like
there's a
8 pages
baby?
description of a baby,
Right. And in a
but
movie too, like holding a shot doesn't give the same significance to, because in this last section, she finds out she's pregnant. And then you have these pages that are like, each page is split into two large panels without words, just depicting nature. And then it shows them like the road in the hospital and them in the hospital. That's another split pages. And then you get five double splash pages of just a baby like opening its eyes and looking around, which, by devoting like double splash pages, I think what makes the ending so powerful is that by devoting like double splash pages, you can tell, you know, she really weights these images with an importance that I
yeah,
think really lands the like an emotional weight to the ending of this comic.
right, and that's, as you said, something that you can. It's a specific technique, I would say, for sequential art,
Yeah,
comic books, and certainly she's showing that she can effectively use that. It's a very skillful ending, a very
right.
skillful way of conveying that message.
Because often when you think of like a double splash page, or at least you would think of like an action comic book, like a Jack Kirby kind of thing, where it's like a bravura action sequence, but she uses it in sort of the opposite emotional register to like portray the importance of a small moment.
Right, because normally a splash page too, I think it's fair to say, is more commonly of something big,
Yeah,
like a cityscape or something large. And here's essentially like a close up,
right.
like a zoom in.
So, Matthew, any other thoughts on Eleanor Davis's The Hard Tomorrow? It sounds like we're both kind of in agreement that this comic book is very good.
Yeah, it is very good, and it's something you could very solidly recommend to pretty much anybody. I mean, it's a quick read.
To
It's like
even normals.
150 to normals who go outside regularly and don't own storage units of, antique Star Trek action figures or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually bought a copy just because I thought my wife would get a kick out of it.
Has she read it yet?
She hasn't read it yet. It's sitting nearby.
Well, maybe you can report back, or maybe we can have her on a future episode.
As an update, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would recommend.
Oh, and I will mention that the other Eleanor Davis comic book I read is, no surprise, also quite good. It was a short story collection called How to Be Happy. Certainly, if you're a person who is getting into her, or by reading this, or have read any of her other stuff, it's certainly worth checking out. I just looked her up on Wikipedia. It says she was raised in Tucson by comic enthusiast parents who exposed her to stories like Little Lulu, Crazy Cat, Little Nemo, and the Kinder Kids. See, that's what happens when you have people who grow up making comic books who aren't hopeless morons reading X-Men comic books like us. Like Crazy Cat there, that's how you get some good influence on your art.
Right, that's how you get the big brain stuff going on.
Yeah. So, anywho, The Heart Tomorrow by Eleanor Davis. It's great.
Yeah, 2 thumbs up. That's our show. Check us out, armyofcrime.com. I'm on Twitter at armyofcrime. Dustin's on Twitter at Dustin444040 at Dustin444444.
Yeah.
Yeah. Drop us some 5 stars. Like and subscribe, as they say on YouTube.
You gotta smash that subscribe button.
Yeah, as the YouTube personalities would say.
Get a hammer and a chisel on your phone and smash it in.
Exactly. Until next time, and this is actually more relevant than ever, stay alive out there. The fact that I started watching the DuckTales cartoon with my son, does that connect to this in any way?
The new one or the old one?
The new one.
Okay. I've watched some of that. It's not a bad cartoon.
Yeah, Donald got a couple laughs out of me,
I like Donald because he's really angry because the world is always oppressing him.
Yeah.
He's the eternally put upon every man.
Right.
Every duck, if you will.